I'm Dimitri Sevastopoulos, Asian News Editor for the Financial Times. I'm here in Hong Kong with Ed Luce, who is the FT's US columnist, and Michael Anti, who is a columnist in China, prolific blogger and tweeter. We've just come from a series of debates where we've discussed whether China's rise comes at the expense of the US. Ed, do you believe that's the case? Why?
Just 10 years ago, America had about 31% of the world economy. That's gone down in 10 short years to 23%. China's gone up from about 7 to 12. In terms of the speed with which this is happening, this is the biggest shift in human history of relative GDP weight from one country to another. Inevitably, that comes with consequences. One of which, and we've just seen this in the last 2 days, is that China gets richer, it gets a bigger military budget.
We know that the American Congress has been very concerned about Chinese military power, but should they be as concerned about the Chinese economy and the rise of the Chinese economy as Ed suggests?
40 years ago, when President Nixon visited China, they helped the Chinese to open to the world. 40 years of reforming policy basically is following United States policy. Like you have Google, we have Baidu. You have Facebook, we have, we almost copycat everything. But this kind of pattern also set the border and the limitation of the imagination for the Chinese rise. So when the America someday start to decline, but also that means the end of China's rise.
But so are you saying that China is not capable of innovation, that it's the criticism that was leveled at Japan at certain times in its post-war history, that it just copied, but actually that served it very well? Can China not take that to a certain point and then innovate itself, or you think that's impossible?
If you really want to go further, to not only follow the following policy, you need some disruptive innovation. You need a consensus. But only one thing we didn't copycat from the United States in the last 40 years is the democracy. But democracy is very crucial for the people in China to get the consensus within what's the next step to go. Without this kind of consensus, you just can't go outside.
Well, Ed, how important do you think that is? I mean, a lot of people would say that the voices at the table in Chinese policy making, the Communist Party, have reached a consensus and no one else has a stake or has a vote in that. How important is democracy in China for the future?
I think it's important to have more freedom. I've been saying in the debates in China that I first went to Shanghai to Beijing in 1987, which is 25 years ago. And everywhere you look, there was a loudspeaker blaring propaganda, patriotic songs. That's gone. China is moving from, has moved from a totalitarian system to an authoritarian system. And I don't think projecting another 15, 20, 25 years ahead, it's that unlikely that it will have loosened a great deal more.
Can we shift to the military story? This week, China revealed that it's going to increase its defense budget by about 11%. And I think the US is planning to decrease its defense budget by 8%. There's still a big gulf between the two, but clearly China is getting closer in terms of the amount of money it spends and the capabilities that it feels in air, at sea and on land. How is this going to impact America?
Well, China can only catch up. Right now, America's military dominance is so overwhelming, and that can't be sustained. It definitely has 11 battle groups, 11 aircraft carriers. China doesn't have one yet. But the larger point here is that America seeks to sustain its global role, to be the continuing global hegemon. China is not seeking to compete with that. China is seeking to extend, its reach in its own region. And the short-term impact has been China's neighbors have been pushed back into America's arms. But I think as those budgets start getting closer together, the influence of China, the fear of China, is going to cause a lot more ambivalence.
Michael, why do you think that's not the case?
And China now is number 2, the GDP, but also the GDP per capita is the 117th. It's a long way to go, right? Secondly, Chinese domestic security cost was even larger than national defense. That means Chinese government think the enemy is not out from outside, it's within.
Let's talk about education, because for the future, without education, you have nothing. Ed, if you were to look at the education systems in both the US and China and the flow of students from each country to the other, what does that tell you, do you think, about?
Well, America continues, and I think will continue for the indefinite, foreseeable future, to have undoubtedly the best universities in the world. But since 9/11, in the last 10, 11 years, It's national securitized its immigration system, and it's become far harder for the talented graduates from Asia and elsewhere to get jobs in America at the same time as they've had rising opportunities at home. So in effect what America is doing is it's subsidizing its competitors. These degrees, these PhDs in engineering and physics are way underpriced. What students pay annually is a fraction of what they really cost these institutions to provide. And then America is graduating them, training them, and then putting them on a plane back home.
But the truth is that more and more Chinese students actually want to go back to China because they can get higher wages, they can buy apartments in the big cities, they can have a higher quality of life than they could have had 20 years ago. Is that not attracting Chinese talent and innovation back?
I think this, this trend about you got a degree in the United States, but you can go find a job in China is still the Nixon pattern. You still have the time machine effect. You still can learn something in the United States and copycat inside China, copy inside China. Mm-hmm. But my point is, in a country which Google is censored, mm-hmm. How can you do something seriously research? Mm-hmm. Freedom of speech is very important when you do the research or do the innovation. Censorship is the biggest enemy for innovation. If China really want to, their talent, not only copycat, but really create something new for the world, not only for Chinese. We need freedom of thinking. Freedom of thinking just means internet freedom or freedom of press. But this is so crucial for China, and it's so hard to get there.
Ed, what does America need to do to reduce the impact of the rise of China?
America's answer to the rise of China has got to be to refurbish at home, and that's got to start with a rejuvenation of the politics and a rediscovery of the sense of pragmatism for which America is so justly renowned. It's lost that pragmatism at the moment. It's got to regain it.
Michael, to give you a similar question, Xi Jinping is expected to follow or succeed Hu Jintao as president of China later this year. If he was one of your tens of thousands of Twitter followers, what advice would you be getting?
I think when you mention China's rise, actually, whether it is China, the country's rise, or the people's rise, because they are different with the number 2 in the GDP and number 117 in the GDP per capita. So it's big difference. But China, you can't let China be the superpower without the Chinese people happy. So the happiness of the Chinese people is more important than the military expansion.
Michael, Ed, thank you both very much. I'm Dimitri Sevastopoulos in Hong Kong.